If you think traveling while working full-time means opening a laptop by the sea, answering 2 emails, and calling it balance, I have bad news. That is not a plan. That is a postcard with Wi-Fi. Traveling while working full-time is possible. Plenty of people do it. Hybrid work is still a major part of modern work life, and among remote-capable employees in the U.S., hybrid remains the dominant model. Gallup reported in September 2025 that 51% of remote-capable employees were working in a hybrid setup, and hybrid workers were spending about 2.3 days a week in the office on average. But the fantasy version and the real version are two very different creatures. The fantasy version says, "I'll just work from anywhere." The real version says, "What's the time zone? Is the internet stable? Does my employer allow this? Am I about to join a client call from a kitchen chair designed by an enemy of the human spine?" That is the real game. And honestly, that is good news, because it means this is not about luck. It is about systems. You do not need to quit your job, sell everything, and become a barefoot philosopher with a backpack and a vague relationship with deadlines. You just need a smarter setup. The biggest shift is mental. Stop thinking of this as a vacation with some work squeezed in. Think of it as operating your normal life from a different place. If you get that part right, everything else becomes easier. A lot of people fail here because they build the trip first and the work second. That is upside down. The work is what pays for the train ticket, the coffee, the apartment, and the occasional emotional support croissant. So the work comes first. A better approach is this: build your working rhythm first, then fit travel around it. For example, say you work full-time for a company based in Berlin, London, or New York. Before you even look at flights, you need to know your overlap hours. When do people expect you online? When do meetings usually happen? When are you actually useful to your team, not just technically alive on Slack? If your job depends on live communication, your travel choices are not random. A beautiful town with cheap rent means nothing if every important meeting lands at midnight and turns your life into a vampire internship. Time zones are one of the quiet killers here. Research on remote teams keeps making the same point. Time zone friction creates stress, delays, and weird workdays where nobody is fully awake or fully done. That is why async communication matters so much. Teams that rely less on constant live meetings and more on clear written updates simply cope better across locations. So rule number 1 is simple: protect your overlap hours. If your team needs you between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. home time, anchor your travel around that. Everything else can bend a little. This part should not. Rule number 2, reduce how much of your work depends on being instantly available. This is where asynchronous communication becomes your best friend. If a problem can be solved with a good written update, a short recorded explanation, a checklist, or a clear handoff, do that instead of creating another meeting. The more your workflow depends on instant replies, the more fragile your travel life becomes. A full-time travel setup becomes dramatically easier when your colleagues know 3 things: what you are doing, when you will respond, and where to find the latest version of the work. That is it. Most stress at work is not caused by distance. It is caused by ambiguity. Now let's talk about the other dictator in this story: internet. Never trust a listing that says "great for remote work" unless you have proof. Everyone says that. A rock in the countryside will probably claim fiber internet if you give it a booking profile. You need a backup, always. The romantic version of remote travel says 1 laptop and 1 cafe. The functional version says primary internet, backup hotspot, charger, cables, and enough battery to survive a minor apocalypse. If you are traveling while working full-time, the rule is not, "Do I have internet?" The rule is, what happens if this internet dies 10 minutes before my meeting? That question should always have an answer. And that answer should not be panic. A good habit is to think in layers. Apartment Wi-Fi is layer 1. Your phone hotspot is layer 2. A nearby co-working space or cafe with decent connection is layer 3. Once you have 3 layers, your stress level drops fast. You stop feeling like one weak router stands between you and unemployment. And yes, work-friendly accommodation matters more than people admit. You do not need luxury. You need a table, a chair, decent light, enough quiet, and a room temperature that does not make you question your life choices. If the only place to work is a bed, that is not charming. That is spinal sabotage. A simple case helps here. Imagine someone takes a one-week trip to southern Italy while keeping a normal full-time job. Sounds manageable. Same continent, great food, dramatic sunsets, very cinematic. But then reality arrives wearing sunglasses. The apartment Wi-Fi is unstable. The kitchen table is tiny. The first meeting overlaps with the host vacuuming the hallway. The second meeting happens during lunch hours when every nearby cafe becomes a symphony of plates and espresso machines. And by day 3, this person realizes they are not working from Italy. They are debugging logistics in Italy. The trip is not ruined, but the illusion is. Now imagine the same trip done properly. The person books a place with a real desk, tests mobile coverage before arrival, keeps meetings concentrated into core hours, turns daily updates into written summaries, uses travel days only for light tasks, builds one half-day buffer in case something goes wrong. Suddenly, the exact same destination becomes viable. That is the pattern with almost everything in this topic. The difference is rarely motivation. It is preparation. Another big part people ignore is honesty with work. Not everyone needs to announce every coffee stop and train seat, but if your employer has location rules, security policies, or tax restrictions, pretending none of that exists is not brave. It is amateur theater. Some companies genuinely allow work from abroad windows. Some allow only short trips. Some care because of security. Some care because of employment law, insurance, or tax exposure. And some care because the last person who tried this probably joined a board call from a beach club and ruined it for everybody. So be structured. If needed, present a simple plan. Where you are going. For how long. What your working hours will be. How you will stay reachable. And what your backup is if something fails. Managers do not want a poetic speech about freedom. They want to know whether this will create risk or drama. Make it easy for them to say yes. Now, the less glamorous but very important part, legal reality. This is where a lot of internet advice gets suspiciously casual. For short stays in the Schengen area, the standard rule is up to 90 days in any 180-day period, and the EU provides an official short stay calculator for this. The UK has specific guidance allowing certain remote activities while visiting, such as answering emails, phone calls, or joining remote meetings. But the guidance is also clear that remote work cannot be the primary reason for the visit. Officials are told to look closely if the stay is long or if the trip only makes financial sense because the person is working remotely from the UK. The United States is stricter in its public visitor guidance. The State Department's tourism and visit materials distinguish tourism from work, and visitor status is not a simple work-from-anywhere pass. So the takeaway is not, never do it. The takeaway is, do not build your life on assumptions. Check the official rules for the exact country and your exact situation. And one more thing people love to oversimplify: taxes. You have probably heard the magical phrase, 183 days. People throw it around like holy water. But tax residency is not a universal mean. OECD guidance explains that tax residency is determined under each jurisdiction's own laws. In other words, the headline number is not the whole story. In the US, for example, the IRS uses the substantial presence test. That does not mean you need to become a tax lawyer before booking a train to Florence. It means you should track your days, stay organized, and avoid drifting into long stays without understanding what changes when travel becomes presence. Think of it this way. Short, structured travel is one game. Extended semi-relocation is another game entirely. And while we are being practical, health matters too. This is where people act immortal right up until the moment they get food poisoning on a Tuesday and need a clinic in a language they do not speak. Travel health guidance from the CDC recommends considering travel insurance before a trip, And EU resources explain how the European health insurance card can help with medically necessary state-provided healthcare during temporary stays for eligible people. So yes, bring the laptop. Also, bring the boring things. Insurance. Medication. Backup charger. Copies of key documents. A basic plan for what happens if you get sick. Because adult freedom is not chaos. Adult freedom is having a plan B before life writes its own. Now, emotionally, there is another trap here. A lot of people try to travel and work full-time as if they're trying to defeat time itself. They pack too many places into too few days. They turn every weekend into transit. They treat every destination like a speed run. That usually ends with exhaustion, not enlightenment. Slow is better. One city for 2 weeks often beats 4 cities in 2 weeks. A simple rhythm beats constant movement. Familiar grocery stores beat endless check-ins. A place where you know where to get coffee before your 9 a.m. call is worth more than one extra landmark. The point is not to impress the algorithm with your location count. The point is to build a life that still feels human while it moves. And that, to me, is where this topic gets beautiful. Traveling while working full-time is not about escaping your life. It is about redesigning it. It is about proving that work does not always have to happen under the same fluorescent lights, between the same walls, with the same view out the same window. Sometimes the biggest change is not quitting everything. Sometimes it is just refusing to believe that your world must stay the size of your commute. You can keep your income, your structure, your responsibilities, and still let more life in. You can work seriously and still see another coastline after lunch. You can answer emails and still hear another language in the street below. You can stay productive and still remember that life was not meant to feel like one long wait for a better season. That is the real promise here. Not fantasy, not escape, expansion. So if you want to change your life without burning it down, if you want to experience the joy of living in another country, even a little at a time, subscribe to the channel. Because that is what Almost Expat is really about. Finding practical ways to make a bigger life feel possible. Sometimes a new chapter does not begin with a dramatic leap. Sometimes it begins with one book ticket, one stable Wi-Fi connection, and one decision to stop postponing your own horizon. Until next time, arrivederci, amici. And now I want to ask you, if you had to take your full-time job on the road next month, would you choose a sunny apartment in Italy, a quiet town in Portugal, or would you panic book something with fast Wi-Fi and discover it was actually just one optimistic pigeon carrying your signal?